Where was I born?
Yep.
In St. Cloud on 24th Avenue North, just south of 3rd Street. And I was a home delivery. Dr. Schatz was the delivery man. And he was well known for delivering babies, so that was quite normal at the time.
Did you have siblings?
I've got siblings, yes. I've got 3 sisters. One is deceased, and 1 brother, and he is deceased as well.
What's your earliest memory? Do you remember what you liked to do as a kid? That sort of thing?
Well, you know, we lived there in St. Cloud for a while, and obviously I wouldn't know it. And my dad grew up in Melrose, which is west of St. Cloud, about 35 miles. So he worked for the railroad for a long time, and the railroad underwent a strike by the workers, and as a result, they moved to St. Cloud. So my dad moved to St. Cloud, and the Depression hit, and a lot of people were put out of work, including my dad. So during the Depression, early in the 30s, he moved the family back to Melrose. So I grew up in Melrose then. And we had a lot of kids in the neighborhood. So we did things together, a lot of things together. In wintertime, you know, we had skating. We were on the Sauk River. So we were skating, and we were skiing and sledding and all that sort of thing. And there were a lot of kids in the neighborhood. So I grew up with those kids, and like I said, we did a lot of things together. We didn't have anything to do in the house. We didn't have radio. We didn't have running water. So in the wintertime, you did your business outside in a 1-holer or 2-holers, and you didn't stick around very long. You're in and out. So all of those are really experiences that I remember, and I don't regret having gone through them either. It was a real learning experience. So we grew up, like I said, together, the whole neighborhood, kids from my age and younger, and up to about age 16, 17. And we played ball together, and football together, and basketball, and all those things. We made our own place, so to speak. And we had, in the summertime, living real close to the Sauk River, we had a swimming hole where the neighborhood kids got together. We put in a diving board. We chipped in our money, and there was not much money around at that time. Nickels and dimes, and bought a diving board probably for $1 or $2. Whatever, and the lumberman probably said, "Oh, this is for a good cause. We'll sell it to you cheap." So we had a lot of fun growing up together, and a lot of friends yet up to this day, the ones that are living, anyhow.
Did you go to was it a community school, or what was your school like?
It was a Catholic grade school. It was St. Boniface. And we had a church that had the same name, St. Boniface. But the Catholic grade school, I attended up through 8th grade. And the rest of them did as well, except for one sister. One sister showed up after I was born 12 years later. So that was kind of a oops. And to this day, she regrets not having grown up with us, because we have so many friends from that time yet. And she doesn't remember any of that. And after World War II started, we moved back to St. Cloud in 1944. So we moved into a house that had running water and all those things. Gas rather than wood stove or coal stove for in the wintertime. That was kind of a learning experience as well in the wintertime with the heat. It could freeze at times upstairs. We had, lots of bedding, including even a buffalo blanket. Yeah. So that was nice and warm. When we moved back to St. Cloud in 1944, I attended a junior high. It was called Central Junior High. So now I had to make all new friends. But I liked the sports, and I got into the sports right away, and I made a lot of friends quick. And after junior high, I went to high school at St. Cloud Tech. St. Cloud Technical High School. It was called Technical High School because at that time they did offer some shop classes, machine classes, that is machine work, like lathe type of machine work, and welding and all those kinds of things. And it was a 3-year senior high school. We had quite a few kids at the high school. We had, I think, around 900 kids. And I got involved with football and basketball. And football, if you got to play as your sophomore year, you were really successful. That is, you were a pretty good player. Well, I didn't play much in my sophomore year, but a junior year I did. And we had tremendous teams at the time. While I was there, we won something like 23, lost 2, tied 1. And my senior year, I was one of the co-captains. So in my junior year, we had a team that went undefeated and unscored upon. Well, that's kind of unheard of, not many teams do that. So to this day, I'm kind of proud of being part of that team, and especially proud of being, one of the captains of the team.
What position did you play?
I played in the line. I played what's called the running guard, which means you pull out of the line whenever you're on offense, and you run interference for the person that's carrying the ball. And I was running guard because, I was faster than most of the linemen were.
Did you play, was it 11 man or was it 9 man?
It was 11. Well, 900 kids, it would be 11-man football, all right. But we played, some of the Twin City teams and Duluth teams, and that as well as some of the local teams. So, like I said, to this day, I'm very proud of being part of that era and part of that one team especially. And after high school, I went to work for the railroad. It was usually at that time, if a family was working for the railroad, as the kids came up, grew up, they would go to work also for the railroad. They had an inn, so to speak. So Sawyer here is part of that. He's fifth generation working for the railroad. My grandfather was a railroad man. He worked in what we called a roundhouse, because it was a roundhouse to work on engines. And then my father was an engineer when he retired. Well, he didn't retire. He was going to retire, and he died that same year before he retired. And then it was myself. See, there's one more in there. We had uncles in there, but anyhow, it was quite normal for a lot of members of the family would be employed by the railroad. And this was after graduating from high school. And at that time, I've got to remember, the Cold War was warming up. It was getting hot. And we were involved with the Berlin blockade, where the Russian government had their troops virtually blockading Berlin. And our government overcame that by using air transport to supply Berlin with fuel and food. And it was successful. But anyhow, also during that time, the Korean War broke out. That was in the 1950, 1951, if I remember right. Yeah, 50, 51. And I was working for the railroad. And
in the pit, in the roundhouse?
yeah, we had at that time the rolling stock, that is the engines that we had were steam locomotives and diesel. But the steam locomotives for a long time were fired by wood, and then it went from wood to coal. So we had coal burner steam locomotives, and then from coal to oil burners, and then from oil burners to diesels. So I was part of that era also, and I'm glad I was, because this was something else working on those big steam engines. Those son of a guns were alive. The levers were going and the wheels were turning and the whistle was blowing, the bell was ringing, and all that sort of thing. Now you just got something on the rail that goes shooting down the rail. Yeah, there's nothing.
The same SD40s from the.
In what?
We still got a bunch of engines from the 40s.
Yeah, well, diesel locomotives, yeah. But you don't see any steam locomotives on the road. But that was a fun time to work for them because of the, just because of were steam engines. And then, like I said, it was like they were alive. All those things were moving and the steam was squirting out or shooting out. It was kind of a tough time to work for them also, because a lot of the workers that worked for them came down with asbestosis. Because those steam locomotives had big jackets on them of insulation and asbestos. And they had to be serviced every so many years. And all that asbestos had to be ripped off and then put back on again. So there was asbestos every place. We were breathing it. So I supposedly have asbestosis. I don't think so. Because now the mechanism, with the MRIs and the X-ray technology and that, you can pretty well see whether you've got asbestosis. And I was originally diagnosed with asbestosis, and lately nobody says a thing about it. They don't. I've asked about it, and they said, no, we don't see anything. So that's good. But I worked for the railroad then, and in 1952, because of the Korean War started in 1950, 1951, something like that, I was drafted. And when drafted, I gotta think my way through this. We went to Chicago to become, determine where we were going to be trained. And because of my railroad background, they sent me to Fort Eustis, Virginia, which had the transportation corps. And I did my basic service there, my training service there. And they put me into engineer school, that is locomotive engineer school. Well, I knew my way around engines and that sort of thing. And the Army at that time did have railroad. They would occupy the areas, and they would then take over the railroad business in those areas. And some of the soldiers would be assigned to operating those engines. So I went to school there, graduated number 1 in the class, as I remember it anyhow. And then we went to classification and assignment. And with classification and assignment, they would determine where you were going, whether you were going to EUCOM, which means European Command, or FECOM, which would be Far East Command. If you went to Far East Command, and some of the draftees chose to be trained in Hawaii, do their basic training in Hawaii, they were guaranteed to end up in Korea. And I didn't want to go to a Far East Command. I went to, like I said, to the other one, European Command. And there wasn't a hot war. It wasn't shooting yet. It was, getting close to that. But after the Berlin air block, things were cooling down a bit, but it was still hot enough so that we had all our servicemen in there, in that area, as well as the Far East. And let's see, there's something in there I'm forgetting. Before I went into service, I got married.
I was going to say, when did you
Yeah.
meet Joni?
Yeah, This was in 1951 that we got married, in September 8th, 1951.
How did you guys meet?
And that was Joni. She was my wife, and she was the daughter of a fireman. Not a locomotive fireman, but of a fireman, for fighting fires and that out in the community. And he ended up as the chief, I think, right after I went into the service. But anyhow, we got married on September 8th, and I got called into service on February 5th. September 8th of 1951 and February 5th of 1952. So we were together, like about 6 months. And off I went. And got home once after that, after basic training. Then from there, went to New York and New Jersey, and went on troop ship over to Germany. That was quite an experience as well. a troop ship, and we had about 3,000, 4,000 men being transported over to Europe. And I was always told when we get to the dock where we were to board the ship that there would be a band there and playing. And there was a band there. But the band, I was always told, well, when you get there and as you're leaving, they'll start playing, I wonder who's kissing her now. I wonder who's telling her how. So I can't remember that ever being played. But we were always told, you wait, they'll play it for you. But we went over there, it took about 10, 12 days to cross the Atlantic. Landed in northern Germany, Bremerhaven. And from Bremerhaven, they shipped us all the way down to Austria and Switzerland. They transported us by railroad all the way down there. And we were then shipped out to assignment from that area. So I went from northern Germany down to southern Germany and finally ended up in about middle Germany. Shipped back north again, halfway. But the place we went to, a place called Sonthofen, if I remember right. Sonthofen and Garmisch, there's some name that I can't remember either. But anyhow, that was an area that Hitler used to send his troops for rest and recuperation, especially the SS men. And beautiful accommodations there. I remember the cafeteria, or mess hall, let's put it that way, that's what we call it anyhow. The mess hall was beautiful. Nice tables, individual little tables like you were going to a fancy restaurant. And big open windows like not open windows, but big windows like we see here. And that was overlooking the Alps. So beautiful country. So Hitler treated some of his servicemen very well. And today it's a big play area for skiing and that sort of thing. So we went back halfway to northern Germany, let's put it that way, and went to a place called Kaiserslautern, to an ordnance depot where I was assigned to a transportation office. We had one locomotive there, never got to run it all while I was there. But we stored ordnance. It could be weapons, could be tanks, could be all kinds of things. And then we'd ship out that equipment to various parts of Germany where our troops were located, or even back to the States. So the people that worked in the transportation office took care of the incoming and outgoing freight. They assigned it to different trains and that, and the Germans would come on the depot and pick up and deliver equipment that was stored in that area. Now, one of the things that we had to do was to ride the engines with the Germans whenever they came on depot. So now we were with locomotives, but we didn't operate the locomotives, the Germans did. The Germans provided the fireman and the engineer, but we had to be with them all the while they were on the depot. So they weren't getting off or getting on. Nobody was getting on at that time that they were in there, because there were a lot of highly secret stuff at that time stored in that depot. So what happened after that? I gotta think. I was there for a year and a half. During that year and a half, I got to talk to Joni, I think, twice. So now, the people go overseas, they're assigned overseas, but they're not isolated like we were then. It was expensive to call back and forth. She never called me, I'd call her. And we'd have to make arrangements, be home, at such and such a time, on such and such a date, we're calling. Anniversary, Christmas, something like that. That's about the time that we talked to each other. And not real long. The pay was quite meager. I think I got $60 or $70 a month. Joni was getting an allotment, though, of around the same thing, about that much as well. So I spent my time in Germany. That's where I did my service. Came back to, this country, and we went back just the same way as we went over. We got on a troop ship, and we came back. And we landed someplace in New Jersey. And we were sent from there to Chicago, and we were discharged in Chicago. And that was in 1953, I think the 22nd or 23rd of January. Yeah. So it was almost 2 full years, anyhow, before I was discharged. And when I was discharged, I think they would give each one of us a amount of money. I can't remember what it was. I think it was around $600. And then any pay we had coming up to that point. But the pay wasn't all that much, like I said. But I did come out of there with a little better than $1,000. So that helped. And Joni lived with her parents while I was overseas. And she was working, and she was saving. We were saving money anyhow at that time. And before I came home, she went and bought a car from one of our friends that had a dealership. Our first car, I think, was a Chevy Belvedere. Cost around $2,000. Think about that compared to now. So when I got back, anyhow, to the States, I took a couple of weeks off and then went back to work for the railroad and became a machinist apprentice. And the railroad business was not doing well. The trucks were competing with the railroad. And the trucks could, travel to a lot of areas that the railroad wasn't servicing. So the railroad business was going downhill. And I decided if I wanted to do anything, I had to make a move. So I decided to use my GI Bill and go to school. So I took a leave of absence from the railroad and went to school in St. Cloud. And started with a pre-forestry. I was interested in the outdoors, so we thought, yeah, maybe I could get in with the ranger service or a forestry service or something like that. And, yeah, I went through the pre-forestry program, and I got to know some of the professors real well. And I would go out and work with them in field trips to different parts of the county down in Stearns County and Morrison County and some of the other ones down in that area, and do field work. And one of the professors that I was going with, one day we stopped in a bar up at Fort Ripley. We're going to have a beer before we went out in the field. He said, "Paul, you'd make a good teacher. Why don't you go into teaching?" I said, "All right, I'll give it a try." So I went through the teacher's program. I majored in biology and had minors in physical science and mathematics. Or one thing that I'm quite proud of as well, when I was there, I had a real interest in mathematics. I didn't have that in high school. High school, I was a straight C student. In college, I was an A student. So I had fun while I was in high school. But anyhow, one of the math professors came to me one day and said, "Paul, we need another teacher. You willing to teach one of the college algebra classes?" I said, "Sure." So I got to teach one of the classes. I was, invited to teach one of them. So that was kind of a feather in my cap. I didn't mind that at all. So I majored in biology and minored in physical science, but mainly chemistry. I took the physics classes as well. And this was now during the Sputnik area. The space program was beginning. And the Russians were beating us. They were the first one to put up a satellite. We put up a satellite later about the size of a soccer ball or something like that. But anyhow, because the Russians were getting ahead of us in math science things, our government decided that they would start paying people to go to school. So while I was there, a person from the physiology department down at the University of Minnesota, the medical school, came to the department and talked to a few of us. And they ended up offering me a scholarship down at the University of Minnesota, full tuition paid, and also a stipend, $300 a month for myself, additional $25 a month for being married, and additional $25 a month for each child we would have. Now, today that doesn't sound like much, but that was better than what I could have had I graduated and gone out teaching. So, we were making money and putting money in the bank when I was going to school. So when I went to university, in the Department of Physiology, I got into renal physiology, kidney work, and worked on research related to kidneys. And the animals of choice to work on were dogs and cats and pigs. And the professor that I went with, a renal physiologist, was accepted me as a graduate student. So I worked in that area on, and we used at that time for my research work, giant bullfrogs, because of certain things we could do with giant bullfrogs at the kidneys that we couldn't do with the other animals. The giant bullfrog, or frogs, have anatomy that's a little bit different than ours. They have a blood vessel that goes to the kidneys called the renal portal vein, as well as a normal kidney structure and arterial supply and venal drainage. And I spent my time working on anyhow those frogs because of the anatomy at the gut. And the research that I did was titled The Effect of Oxytocin on the Doubly Perfused Frog Renal. The effect of oxytocin on the ionic permeability of the doubly perfused renal tubule. So to determine how various things affected that kidney and what the kidney would do with these solutions or ions that we were supplying to them, we used Ringer's solution. I don't know if you two know anything about
Not too much. Don't worry about it. Though.
Okay, all right.
Over here.
But
I did it.
but anyhow, we used Ringer's solution, and we also used radioactive materials like potassium 42, sodium 24, chloride 36, and tritium. And I spent quite a bit of time working on those frogs. And after going through about a dozen or a few more, we started to write up the work. I was what they called a PhD trainee. And I was doing that for my research, my thesis. And during the time, the professor that I had was offered a job out in Oregon, the medical school in Portland, Oregon. And he decided to take that position, and he told me to come along with him. He asked me to come along with him. And Joni and I talked it over, and we decided no, we didn't want to go to Oregon. So I dropped out of school, so to speak, and went to work up on the Iron Range, teaching at the Greenway High School and the Itasca Junior College. The high school and the junior college were together. The district operated both, as I recall. And I spent then 4 years at the school, and after that, I got an opera job at St. Cloud at Tech High School. And seeing Joni and I were both from St. Cloud and that, we decided to go back to St. Cloud, and I would start teaching there. So we did, and that was in 1965. By that time, we had 3 children. It was Therese was the oldest, and then Lynn, and then Mark. So Therese was like 9 years old, Lynn was 7 years old, and Mark was 4 years old. And when I got to Tech High School, I started a course called Human Biology. And it became a very popular course. It was anatomy physiology, that's what it was. And I spent 27 years then teaching mainly that course. I taught some chemistry at the same time. I taught some physics for a few years, but mainly human biology, anatomy, physiology. And I had very good students. They couldn't get into the class unless they had a certain grade and they had gone through biology first, unless their counselor would allow them to go to my class without taking biology, and I would allow them. And you only got to do that if they were exceptional students. So I ended up teaching 5 classes of human biology, anatomy, physiology. That'd be 125 up to 175 students per year. If I had 130 or more students that signed up, another teacher would be assigned to 2 of the classes. And I wouldn't let them teach my class. So I would make a deal with them, and it was really good for them. I would do all the lecturing and the lab work, setting up the labs and all that. All they had to be was there. So when we did laboratory work, we did a lot of laboratory work. We'd use 2 rooms. The other teacher would be in the other room while I was in my own room. But we had talked things over. I would do all the planning. So, like I said, all they had to do was be there and supervise the students. And we did lots of lab work. We did fetal pigs for human anatomy. Pigs are much like we are on the inside. And besides fetal pigs, we used sheep brains, sheep hearts, sheep kidneys, giant bullfrogs. What else? Regular frogs, the smaller leopard frogs, for some of the lab work. But there was one class there that I loved to teach, or a laboratory session that I loved to supervise. And that was when we went through the renal system. They would bring in their own bottle of urine and run their own urinalysis. That was a fun time because we put on the board, BYOB, bring your own bottle. And I tell them now the urine has to be your own. You can't use the urine from the family dog. Well, they could have, and I wouldn't have known the difference. No, don't use it from the family dog. And I tell the gals, you know, if you got your period, just have somebody else in the family, you know, donate for you. But they'd come in with their bottle, and they'd be kind of sheepish. And they worked at different stations in the lab, and there'd be girls as well as boys, you know, at the same lab table. And at the beginning of this, you know, not much was said, and everything was kind of quiet and that. So to break the ice, I'd have my own bottle. And we'd start off the class session with me doing my own testing. And I'd take my bottle and I'd hold it up. Now, the first thing we're going to do, I tell them, is we're going to run the taste test. So I take my bottle, I use one finger and go in and pull it out, and then taste a different finger. But I do that fast. They'd be surprised. And I said, no, you've got to do that. And some of them would. A few of them would. But most of them wouldn't. Yeah, they'd say, oh, that's not near. So well, if you want to try it. But anyhow, they'd run their urinalysis. Oh, and there's something else I did before that too, and I gotta mention this. Before we ever run the taste test, we'd have them take the bottle and hold it up and toast each other. And they link arms like that. One person would have the bottle here, and the other person would come around the other way, have the bottle wrapped in their hand. And so now look at each other. They look at each other and sing now along with me. My urine's better than your urine. My urine's better than urine. Like I said, that was a fun class to teach, because once we went through the initial part and got things more comfortable for them, then they had the fun of actually doing their tests. And in all the years we did this, we only found 2 people that were diabetic. And in both cases, they came from families that were diabetics.
No pregnant people?
Pardon?
Back then?
Yeah. Said no pregnant girls?
No pregnant ones? We didn't test for that. Oh, we had a few pregnant ones in class, you know, during the years, but we didn't test for that part, at least.
Do you test like specific gravity, and then you test for glucose in there?
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
And
we had them, you know, do the specific gravity, like you said, and the glucose, and we had them do the visual, microscopic.
so they're kind of
And
microscope.
yeah, and microscopic, you know, some of them would come, especially the gals, you know, well, always the gals. They come in, there'd be a lot of junk in their urine. And they would take it and put it out on a slide and examine it. And they'd be squamous cells, flat fish scale-like cells. And the vaginal lining is squamous tissue. And that's the kind of cell that you find there. Well, it depends upon what part of their cycle that they're in as to whether it'll be quite clear or whether there'll be lots of those squamous cells. So those that had a lot of squamous cells in them, they'd be a little bit upset. I tell them, well, don't worry about that, you're normal.
So how long did you teach for before you retired? How many years?
Pardon?
How many years did you teach before you retired?
27. 32, rather. 32 including the teaching up on the range. But my main teaching was there at St. Cloud Tech.
Were you ready to retire when you did, or? were
Yeah,
you-
I was ready to retire, and I retired early at age 62. I could have gone farther, but I was ready to retire. While I was at technical high school, I did a lot of other things. I was department chair for 20 years, and we had 15 people in the science department. And I took care of getting people to work for the athletic events, the games, and all that sort of thing. That is, took care of providing people to sell tickets and take tickets, and also supervise. And let's see, there's one other thing that I took care of microscopes. I did microscope repair and that for many years. I did all this to increase my retirement funds. And it's paying off. It's paid off over the years many times because I did all the extra work.
So yours says you're an avid outdoorsman. You live
Yeah.
on the machine. Tell us
Who
about
taught you how
that.
So-
to trap? Who taught you how to trap? Your dad, or?
Oh,
you just
well,
figured it out?
my dad, we started, we'll go back to World War II. In the late 30s, the 30s were tough times. It was the Depression. And we lived right close to the river, and we did all kinds of things down that river. And one of them was to trap muskrats in the spring. And we'd sell those muskrats for $1, $1.50. And that was a lot of money for one of those hides. And the wages were very low at that time. If people were working hourly job at 30, 40, 50 cents an hour, that was quite common. So we'd get maybe $20, $30 for trapping from trapping the muskrat. And once in a while we'd get a mink or something like that. This was all extra money, and it was started us with, at least me, with my fishing tackle, my first rod and reel, and additional lures that went with it. That's a long time ago.
When did you
So
start?
we started, my dad was an avid hunter. So I learned to hunt and trap early. Shot my first duck when I was 7. Got my first pheasant when I was 8. Got my first deer when I was 13. And I've got that deer about a mile from here, east of right where we're sitting right now. And that was in 1942. And we did a lot of trapping after that. During the wartime, a neighborhood friend of mine, actually a cousin, he and I partnered, and we trapped muskrats. And we trapped some 50-some muskrats, a couple of mink. And we got $110, I think, for the bunch. Now we each got $55. That was, quite a bit of money at the time. A job that people got $200 a month was a very good job. So we got all that spending money. Boy, spend it on a lot of malls. And clothing, more lures, and ammunition, and all that. During the wartime, I got my first shotgun, bought it myself by going out and picking up iron and selling it to the metal buyers, scrap iron. And I got enough money from that to buy a 20 gauge shotgun. And after graduating from high school, going to work for the railroad, I was earning enough to buy a good shotgun, and I did. 1948 or 49, a good Model 12 gun that I have to this date. And what else do you want to know?
You should tell them about when you and Billy went to work for the railroad, how you fudged your information so you could go, and what happened a couple of years ago when we got caught because you fudged it.
About what?
About your social security and that. When you and Billy Weitzel went to work for the railroad and you were too young.
Well, yeah, during wartime, most of the young men were in the service, and the railroad needed people to work. And we heard about a job that was over in Wisconsin working for the Sioux Line Railroad. You had to be 16 years old. Well, we got our birth certificates and we forged our birth certificates, altered them, let's put it that way. And we went over to Wisconsin and they hired us. Now, they had to know that those things were altered, but they could care less. They wanted bodies. So we were given Social Security numbers at that time. And I got an odd Social Security number, and so does my good friend Bill. The two of us went together, and we were, at that time, inseparable. We were always together. Bill Weitzel was his name, and we were almost constant companions. We spent a lot of time. He lived in St. Cloud at that time, and I lived in Melrose, but we spent a lot of time during vacation and Christmas. And during the summer, we spent a lot of time at our place in Melrose. He went into service. He went through college and went into service, and I went into service. And we kind of parted over the years. But he's my best buddy. He was, anyhow.
Now tell them what happened when we were doing taxes a couple of years ago when everything moved online. Remember what happened and we couldn't file your taxes? Because you fudged your birth certificate.
No.
Yeah, and they had his birth date as 1929 instead of 1930. And I went upstairs and says, why does it say this? He goes, oh, Billy and I changed our birth certificates
That's
to go
right,
work.
yeah,
And they
yeah.
first caught him
Yeah,
like in 2013.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So when
Thank
you
you.
first started working for the railroad, you were Jack's
he
age?
was 15.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we went to work over in Wisconsin, and we lived in boxcars. We lived in a boxcar that was fixed up with beds, and that, so it was a bunk car. And we had another boxcar that was fixed up for a mess hall. And we didn't have, well, we did too. We had some showers. That's good.
So were you graduated high school at that point?
At that point, no. Let's see, we were both 15. So yeah, we were like sophomores in high school. But another thing that I remember real well, we used to go hunting We lived in St. Cloud at that time, and he lived in St. Cloud most of his life. But anyhow, we had moved back to St. Cloud, and he and I would get on a train and go hunting. We didn't take the dog, but we took our guns, just broke them down, and got on the train, and nobody said a thing. They let us on the train, we carried our guns on the train, we got up to Melrose, we got off. Now, what was involved there, both his dad and my dad were longtime railroad employees, and we had a pass, a family pass. So any of the family could get on a passenger train and ride to wherever they wanted it to go. For 2 of the summers while I was in high school, we worked, he and I both went out to work for the Forestry Department, the Bureau of Entomology. And we rode from St. Cloud out to Idaho. And we worked in camps out in the mountains. And there we lived in tents. We had a mess hall, big tent. And we spent our summers working for the Forestry Department. And we had some real experiences at that time as well. We were put out on one fire call. We went to one forest fire. It wasn't all that big. It was something around 2,000 acres. And we came in as cleanup persons. Pretty much all the fire was put out already. The thing that I recall best is when we were out there, it was berry time. It was huckleberry time. And huckleberries are much like blueberries. They taste like blueberries, but much bigger. And we spent most of our time not firefighting or putting out hot spots, but sitting out in the bushes eating blueberries or huckleberries. And we got paid something like $1.25 an hour for that. Like I said, I'll never forget that one either.
Can you tell us about how you met your wife?
Yeah, I guess so. This was when we were, sophomores, I think. She was a year ahead of me. Even though her birthday was 1/13/30, my birthday is 1/16/30. She was 3 days older than me. Delivered by the same doctor, by Dr. Schatz at home. And at that time we had what we call, what the heck was the name of it yet? It was like a teenage center for kids to go to. Yeah, forgot all about that. But anyhow, at this center, we had a dance floor, and we had pool tables, and we had a concession area, and a bunch of tables set up, so you could sit down and have some pop or whatever. So a lot of the teenagers went to that center after school or in the evening. And that's where I met Joni. This was like in 1946, something like that. And we got married then in 1951. We didn't go together all that much at the beginning, but we were together a few times. And it wasn't until 1950 or 49 that we started really dating and being together a lot. So that's how I met my wife, is at that teenage center.
Do you remember where you proposed to her?
Proposed to her?
Yeah.
See, that just kind of happened kind of natural. It was a winter time when I gave her an engagement ring. So there was no big deal. We expected that, you know. She expected that. What else can I tell you?
When did you start coming up here? Did your dad come up here?
Yeah. My dad came up here because he and his brother started hunting up here in 1918. They both worked for the railroad, like I said, and they both rode the engine from St. Cloud up to Northholm. And at Northholm, they'd get off the train and they'd find somebody that was headed out this direction. Like, we're about 8 miles from Northholm right here. 13 miles, rather. 8 miles straight east of Northholm by number 1 highway. Down to, what do we got, 26. So they would go out there, and they went there because there was somebody that used to live in St. Cloud that came up here to farm. And they were out on number 1. So they started hunting in that area, and they gradually moved down here over the years. And one of the years when they were in this area is 1920 something, late 20s, I think. They were camped over to where you're staying right now, in the cabin you're staying. They were camped out there because there used to be a forestry camp there, a logging camp rather, there, and that area was open. And by that time, Ben, my dad's brother, had a car, and they went back into that old forestry camp and set up a tent. And this was in November, late November. And one of the days when they were there, the person that lived right here where we're at right now, the location, almost probably in the same spot, a family by the name of Buttweilers lived and homesteaded the area, this spot. And Mr. Buttermeyer, his name was Bill Buttermeyer, came over and said, "Boys, you can't stay here tonight. You'll freeze to death. You come over in the house with us." So they came from where they were camping over into the house, and there were 8 kids at the time that the Buttermeyers had, but it was a big house. It was a house that had been setting right here. And the Buttermeyers invited him to come back next year. So just come on up and come in with us, and you can stay with us. So they did, and that was in the late 1920s. And then I first came up with them in 1942. That's how we got started in this area. So that's a long time ago.
So when they moved, then your family decided?
Yeah, see, both of them, Bill Buttermeyer died while we were here at the beginning of, just before the beginning of deer season. back in the 1950s. My dad was here, his brother was here, my brother Gene was here, and myself. And Bill was probably in an area right close to where the stove is over there right now, in the bedroom, and he died at that time. And we, in fact, Gene and I went in with him, and with Mrs. Buttweiler, while he was dying, and he died while the three of us were with him. So that's about it. What else can I tell you?
Do you think of anything specific we should ask him about?
I don't know. How did you and Gene end up with the property up here?
How did we what?
How did you pay for the property up here? When you bought it from Bondemeyer's, and then they could stay until they couldn't live here anymore?
Oh, yeah. The place that you're living in, a guy by the name of Harry Buttweiler owned that place. And I wanted to get some land here and possibly buy it from him. So we had him sign a letter of intent that when he died, he wanted the place to go to us, or if he wanted to, he would sell us the place before he died. So he agreed to that. And the agreement was that as long as he was living, he could live in that house that you're in now. And we would pay him the value of the house at that time, and we bought that house for $3,000, and the land, and the 40 acres of land.
And that was back in what, 76?
This is in 1976, that's right.
But how did you save your half? I remember that one. You quit smoking cold turkey.
Well, I know that didn't pay for it. No, but yeah,
I
we.
was told. You quit smoking cold turkey and saved the money, because
So-
cigarettes went up to 50 cents a pack.
What we did, we paid him half one year and half another year, and that's the way he wanted it. So that's the way we paid him. So my brother got half for $1,500, and I got half for $1,500. So it's worth a lot more now, but that was the deal. And he lived there until 1992. So, and this was in 1976 when we agreed to it. Anything more that?
Yeah, so that's going to write them into.
Let's see. So now, how many grandkids do you have now?
I've got 5 grandchildren, and let's see, we've got 2 great-grandchildren and 2 great-great-grandchildren. So that's it up to
You
now.
have 4 great-grandchildren. 5 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren.
Yeah, 4, not great. We don't have any great-grand.
Right. You don't have any great
4. Jack and
Jack
Dakota.
doesn't have any kids yet.
Jack and Dakota
we
and
know.
Ellie and Evie, yeah. All right. Jack and Dakota, Ellie and Evie, that's 4 grandchildren. Now, we don't want any great-grandchildren yet.
I know.
Can you think of anything else that I don't know, or got anything, Ann?
Oh, I know something else. While I was over in Germany at the transportation office, They came one day to the office because I was there, I guess. And they said they needed somebody to go out on the range. When they say the range, that means they go out where they fire the rifles and teach Polish displaced persons how to fire some of our weapons. Now, when I went into service, I knew my way around guns and that. At that time, a lot of people did. And I was very good with handling those weapons, and I was an expert, in firing them. So they came and they wanted me to go out with them on the range, headquarters company, and teach these people how to use our weapons. So I did. And I may be paying partially for that, my hearing, hearing aids. And because when I came out of service, one of the last things the guy that tested my hearing says, "You sure you can hear all right?" And I said, "Yeah, I could hear him talk and stuff like that." So I said, "Sure." So that may have left me with, some hearing loss. But it was fun doing. I couldn't speak their language. They couldn't speak my language. We tell them, put the Schwarze Punkt, Grata. That means put that black spot right up here. And I'd draw them a little picture in the sand or something like that, how to aim that thing. So, like I said, it was kind of fun to do that. I didn't spend a long time on the range teaching them, but I did spend maybe 4 or 5 days at it.
What about the Quonset huts in St. Cloud?
Oh, yeah, that too.
That's kind of cool.
When I decided to go to school, it was going to cost a little bit to do that, even though we're using the GI Bill and we got some money for being able to go to school, to be able to go to school, let's put it that way. The university at that time was a college. They had Quonset huts set up. Now, Quonset huts are big chicken coops. They curved things like that. They come up, the roof comes almost down at the ground. We got one sitting right up here on the hill. And half of the Quonset hut was fixed up. There was about, I'd say, 60 to 70 foot long. And they had a partition in the center. And they had them set up with running water on both ends, the toilets and the whole thing, and the heating apparatus, whatever it was. In this case, it was gas. And they would let us live in those. The families live in those huts for $20 a month. So that was our rent. $20 a month. That's all.
Were they on like a football field or something?
Yeah, it was on a football field. The north end of the football field was devoted to the vets. And we had about, I'd say, maybe 30 or 40 Quonset huts there. And they called that area Fertile Flats, because we were all young couples, and there were lots of kids.
How many years were those huts up for?
How long were they in existence? I'm not sure. But it was for some time after I was there.
How long did you live in them?
We lived there for 3 years. I did my undergraduate work in 3 years rather than 4 years.
How did you get the nickname Buzz?
By an uncle, because at that time we always had a dog, and I always had a dog with me, and I'd be running all over the place. And I was buzzing all over the place like a bee. So he started calling me Buzz. You're buzzing around like a bee. So that's how I got the name Buzz.
So your dad was Paul, right, too?
Yeah.
Paul Jr.?
Yeah, I'm Paul Jr. My dad was Paul. My mother was Beatta. Oh, I got to tell you another one. A great grandma, not a great grandma, but a grandma to me. My dad's mother. She was raised in Florida, and my dad was born in Florida, down in Jackson, Florida. But she would go back to Florida once in a while to visit with her family, her sisters and that. And she and I were quite close. And when she said she was going to Florida, I thought she was going to like some place with a jungle with lots of palm trees and all that sort of thing. And I told her I wanted a coconut. So when she came back to St. Cloud, she brought a coconut back with her. And she came on the train and that, and she had to, carry that coconut all the way back. I've got that coconut yet. So, and this was in 1936. So she brought that thing back, and at home in St. Cloud, that is in my house in St. Cloud, it's up on the shelf. I've got it in a bag, and I've got it identified. So it only goes to somebody that will keep it. What else?
I think. What else we can ask you? When you were younger, did you, because your family worked at the railroad, is that kind of what you knew you were going to do? Is that what you wanted to do?
That's it. Yeah, that's right. That's one of the years after going to work for the forestry department out in Idaho. When we got back, Bill was going to college at the time, or going to enter college at the time. When we got back, he went to school. I went to work for the railroad. And that was in 1948. And I worked for the railroad until 1958. When I was working for the railroad and decided this isn't for me, this railroad business is going to heck. And they essentially did for quite a while. I had to get out, and I had the GI Bill available, so I took advantage of it. And while I was doing that, while I was doing my undergraduate work, anytime I had a break and wanted to go back for the railroad, the foreman at the roundhouse would put me to work. And I'd pick up just some extra money at the time. So that was always, in our mind, we had to keep, earning something. And by that time we had, it was when I first year in school, we had Therese, our daughter, oldest daughter, was born. And then in '58, when I finally graduated from college, in the summer of '58, I graduated, and I went from there directly to where I got my scholarship down in the Department of Physiology. And that was paid for by the National Institutes of Health, I think. Yeah, I'm losing it again.
What did you like about teaching?
I love my students. I really did. I got to teach what I was really trained for. You know, I was way overqualified to teach them after 3 years in graduate school at the University of Minnesota and going through the same courses that the MDs were going through. I was way overqualified, which was nice. I knew what I was talking about. And I got good students. Like I said, they had to meet certain qualifications before they could get into the class. So I had students that were capable of learning, let's put it that way. So often teachers are burdened with students that are almost impossible to teach. So when they say no individual or student left behind, I'm not so certain about that. No way. You can't teach them all. No, you can't teach them all the same thing. You want them to be qualified for something, they got to have the innate ability to do it. And you've got to have some encouragement for students to do it. And that's parents. Like I said, I like my students, and I guess the students like me too, because I had lots of them. And I think I had something to do with some of their decisions to go into the areas that they did go into, especially the ones that went into the medical areas.
Sound like a bunch of them work at St. Cloud Hospital or in a few.
Yeah, I go into the hospital, it's not uncommon to see somebody to come, hey, Mr. B. Or they'll come and they'll be with me for a while if I don't recognize them. And I recognize them, a lot of them. If I don't recognize them, they'll say, I had you as a teacher back, you know, let's say in 60s or 70s, something like that. I say, what is your name? And then I'm looking at them. And most often I can place them. I've got oodles of students that have become nurses, dentists, MDs, a few PhDs in various fields, psychiatrists, and all the specialists and that. We did a lot of oral testing rather than paper tests. With my students, we did a lot of oral testing. You can't cheat on an oral test. And they preferred that to taking written tests after a while, because they knew if they did a good job right away, they got a good grade. So we taught what's called outcome-based education. That's what the way I taught. We taught for certain outcomes. In order to get a A grade, you had to reach this level. And a B grade, you had to at least reach another level. If they failed a test, they had an opportunity to retake it and still get a B grade. So if they failed, well, you can give it another try if you want. Otherwise, you take the best you can get as a C. So they shot for A's right away. And to this day, I get good comments from them about doing things the way we did it. Lectures and follow up with lab work. Lab work really important. I've got one Rhodes Scholar that I helped get her scholarship. And we had at that time, once I got established, we had student instructors that would help me. They were students that had gone through the class already, and I had quite a few student instructors. I'd have 3, 4, 5 a year. And they would help me demonstrate things or help students, to go and doing a work on animals and showing them stuff. And, if they were real good, we'd let them give oral tests. And it worked out fine. But in order to get a grade, they have to reach a certain level. If they didn't pass eventually, they would not get a grade at all. It would be incomplete until they've passed, and I don't care if they come back a year later and take the test, I would give complete. If they completed their work, they'd get credit. Some counselors didn't like that. The students liked it. I liked it. But because they weren't getting a grade, the counselors didn't like it.
Is there anything you wish you would have done or something you never got to experience?
Well, I decided not to finish a PhD. When my advisor, professor, mentor, went to Oregon to take a job at the University of Oregon Medical School, I decided to quit. So I'm what's called a PhD dropout. But I got paid when I eventually got out teaching. When I started teaching, I didn't have a master's degree or a PhD, but I had 150 credits beyond a bachelor's degree. So most places, districts, had what's called a BA plus 60. If you had a BA degree plus 60 additional credits, even though you didn't have a master's degree, that piece of paper, they would pay as if you did have it already, because they were obviously getting, the benefits of having instructors with that more knowledge, that additional knowledge, put it that way. And I ended up getting paid on a PhD level then, before I, retired. So I didn't need to jump through all the hoops, but I still could kick myself in the butt for not finishing a PhD. I had the golden opportunity to do it. Uncle Sam would pay for everything, and I didn't do it. So that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's a big failure. I mentioned that to my primary care physician some time ago. And he got out of his chair and he came over and he knelt down by me and he said, "Paul, you touched a lot of people." So that meant a lot to me. That's about it.
Well, I think we got about an hour and a half in, more
You-
than that.
You
so.
did?
Yeah,
You did really good.
I think we have everything we need. You guys feel good?
Yeah, but at this age, I'm lost for words. It's so often it bothers me. You know, I can't be just fluent and go from one to the other. I can't do that anymore.
I'd say you did a pretty good job, because we didn't have to ask you many questions. You just kind of kept going for us, so.
Well, I hope it comes out good.
You know, but-
Did he tell you mom chased him?
No, we didn't hear about that. So your wife chased after you.
That's
What?
what I heard.
That's what she says, that she was the one who went
That
after
mom
you.
chased you. Pursued you when you were dating. She wanted to date you.
Oh,
That's what I always heard.
Yeah,
And she'd
that's
be in
what
the
I had.
bathroom at the
that's what I understand too.
yeah. She'd be in the bathroom at the drive-in or wherever they hung out. And when he would walk in the door, they'd put on the jukebox, "You Gotta Be a Football Hero," that song. And then she'd know that Buzzy was in the place. So then she'd come out. So that's what we were always told. That's what Mom always told us. And that, I mean, her sister confirmed it too, that she chased him, so.
Big stud muffin.
Did you guys do a lot of dancing then? So, because you said you danced when you kind of early on in your relationship.
I danced.
Yeah, well, or did you guys dance? What did you
No,
guys do?
not me. Oh, sure. Did I do jitterbug or anything like that? No way.
Tell them where you went on your honeymoon.
On a honeymoon, we went to a Rainy Lake, Rainy River. She had a relative, or her dad had a relative up in that area that had a resort. And we went up there. Now we got up there. Let's see, the first night of our after our wedding honeymoon, we made it to Brainerd. And we stopped there, we stayed there overnight. And then we went up to Rainy River, up by Rainy Lake. And when we got there, they didn't have a place for us. They said they were going to have a place for us. And they let us use their place. Then, wouldn't you know it here, at night they come with a chivalry. You know what a chivalry is? Oh, they come with like a little celebration, you know, and all the relatives and stuff. Oh, we didn't want them around. This was our honeymoon. And we didn't have food or liquor or anything like that for them. So next day we were out of there. And we went down to Island Lake. Island Lake is just, you know, a few miles from here. It's about 3 miles straight west. And we went to a resort there. And we stayed there for a week then, or about a week. That was our honeymoon.
Did you guys have any hobbies or anything that you did together that you like to do?
Not together, but I did. And I made a little money with it. I spent a lot of my time making fishing jigs. Hooks with some lead on one end and some feathers and chenille on the other end. And so I made thousands of those, tens of thousands, let's put it that way. From 1950s, I started using those things. 1960s, I started selling some of those things. 2005, I quit making. Yeah, it must be a good dozen years or so that I haven't made any. Oh, I'll sit down and tie some jigs once in a while. I did anyhow. But I was selling them to bait shops and at various places here in St. Cloud and Rockville and up at Mille Lacs Lake and up right here and, at Island Lake. different places. So I could make a few bucks each year doing that, and that paid for my hunting and fishing. And that's about it as far as hobbies or anything else. But we made a little money doing it.